George Pickens going to the Cowboys and how it relates to the Sacramento Kings. We'll have that for you as well. James Ham, BJ Armstrong was hired yesterday as the Kings assistant GM, or at least it was reported yesterday that he was hired or will be hired as the Kings assistant general manager. Of course, he played for the Bulls. He spent time with in various front offices. He's been an agent, and he was Scott Perry's podcast partner.
Yeah.
So
I think all good relationships start with a podcast partner. I mean, that seems to be the deal, right?
Sure.
That's why I expect to join Doug Christie's coaching staff, since we were podcast partners at one point, even though I have no idea what I would do as an NBA assistant coach.
Congratulations, man. That's good for you.
No, I'm not joining his staff, but I really do like the BJ Armstrong addition. I think it's, anytime you're building out a staff, you want to have guys from all kinds of walks of life. And not only does BJ Armstrong have experience as a player, but experience in a front office. And then he's been an agent for like 19 years. So he's got ties all around the league. And I think if there's one thing that we know over the last, most of the last 15 years, is that the Kings, they haven't had a lot of good relationships around the league. And that's usually a problem. It makes it very difficult to get major deals done when there isn't trust between you and an opposing front office. And I think this is another one of those moves where you're adding someone who knows the league well, that has friends around the league, that can help facilitate a major trade. And look, I think if Scott Perry is comfortable with BJ Armstrong as one of his leading, guys in the front office, then that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think as much synergy and what's the word I'm looking for? Like their ability to work together.
Yeah.
Is going to be so important, because it felt like, and again, I wasn't in the building, obviously, but based on everything we knew about the previous Kings front office, it felt like there was some level of friction or disconnect maybe between Wes Wilcox and Monty McNair, like they were operating as separate entities within the same front office. And I don't get the idea that that's where the BJ Armstrong edition comes in. It feels like he's more, it felt like it, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, from where I sit and from what I read and hear, it felt like Wes Wilcox was there to do the stuff Monty McNair didn't want to do as a GM, or maybe didn't excel at as a GM, whereas where it blurred the line between who was running the show. And this seems very much more like a healthier general manager, assistant general manager relationship.
Yeah, that, and I don't think that Scott Perry is going to concede large portions of the job like Monty McNair did. And
Right.
look, I don't think that there's anything wrong with the structure that the Kings had with Monty and Wes. As people, they got along really well, right? And even though it was a very odd pairing where you had two guys interview for a job, you gave one of them the job, and then asked the guy you gave the job to hire the other guy as his assistant without even knowing each other at all. That's strange. And that's
really odd.
not good business, just to be honest with you. It's not. But I had a conversation with Wes Wilcox one time, and he said, a third of the league really likes me, a third of the league we're fine, and another third of the league probably has a little apprehension, just from dealings in the past. And he said he thinks that that's healthy. And I, to a certain degree, I understand that, because you don't want to be just the person that everybody wants to go to for a trade, because that probably means you're giving away too much every time. Right. So I think the new structure that they're going to have here is going to be people who do similar roles, but just break things up a little bit differently. Like Wes Wilcox had a lot of power in the building, a lot.
Yeah, he did.
And
Some might argue too much.
Yeah, and I think that argument could be made that it was too much. I think that it's one thing to have somebody who's overseeing stuff and who is the direct contact So you're not dealing with every single one of these departments all the time. And we've talked about this in the past. It's more than just like going out and trading for players. That's
Mhm.
not just the job of the GM, right? The
Right.
GM has to control, they have to deal with hiring and firing of, medical staff, training staff, coaching staff, PR staff, with the media relations staff, not the PR for the franchise, but the media relations staff. All of these pieces fall under one person. And travel, like who are you going to play in preseason? There are a lot of things that go into this job. And so it is good to have somebody that you feel comfortable with, and
Mhm.
that's sort of your partner in doing all of these things, and also sort of that bridge. So if you do have somebody at the media relations staff that has some sort of issue, they go to they'll go to a guy like BJ Armstrong, and then he'll have the discussion with Scott
Mhm.
Perry, as opposed to Scott having to deal with so many things all the time. And I think it's the same thing with the coaching staff. That's why,
Mhm.
going out there and getting a really, really good frontline, um, former NBA head coach, lead assistant, is a big deal for Doug Christie. He needs a buffer between him and everything that's going on. So everything kind of gets funneled into one area and then disseminated to Doug in a way that doesn't overwhelm, because he has other things on his plate. And that takes trust and everything else. But that's what I think that Scott Perry's trying to build here. And we still don't know what's going on with Phil Jabor, if Phil Jabor is going to be back in Sacramento, who's,
I have a question.
yep.
Why do I care about Phil Jabor?
Phil Jabor, well, to be honest with you, this offseason, maybe you don't care that much because the Kings don't have a draft pick. But
What
he
is it? What does
is,
he do? Like, why is that? Why
yeah,
is that name significant to me?
he heads up the scouting department. And
Got it.
that's why it's a big deal, like whether he's back or not, because you've got to have a scouting director who, and he doesn't just deal with like college scouting, right? It's not like he's just going to every game that he can possibly go to on the college scene and then
Mhm.
reporting back. A guy like Phil Jabor deals with all kinds of scouting, including advanced scouting. And like when you're sending a scout out to go check out 4 teams that you're going to face on a 4-game road trip that you
Right.
don't typically play, and then they can feed back to the coaching staff, who's got someone on the coaching staff side who's also creating something, right?
Mhm.
So
Right.
it means a lot when you go into a game against, like, say, a team like, I don't know, like Philadelphia, and you don't play Philadelphia, you play them twice a year, so you don't really know them. But
Mhm.
if they're in a major turmoil and everyone knows that, and you walk into the building understanding that there's a lot going on there, those are games that are gettable in a different way. And so having scouts all over the place, having people who are reporting back on news that they're hearing and all that stuff, it actually matters. So Phil Jabor, like, again, I think he's done a fine job in Sacramento. I don't know what his fate is, though. He's got a lot of experience from the Houston Rockets, also Philadelphia. He was a director of scouting for the 76ers before he came to the Kings. We don't know about him, but Paul Johnson, from what we hear, will be back. And then,
And
I
what does
heard
Paul
this
Johnson
morning,
do?
Paul Johnson was a GM of the Stockton Kings. And
Okay.
so, yeah, so he was a GM, but then he got elevated when they made some moves there, and he's been, I think, director of player personnel.
Got it.
So, like, sort of creating a pathway and a game plan for each individual player and
Sure.
their development, and sort of being there to be a sounding board. I mean, you need bodies in the front office.
Mhm.
That's one thing. You don't want, a group of players, or even one or two players sort of falling by the wayside, because the general manager doesn't have time to talk to everybody all the time.
Right.
And so this is you have these layers in the front office that matter. And it's also, we talked about this the other day, that these things don't count against the salary cap. You want to have the best support staff possible, and that's for every level. That means that if you have a spectacular trainer that you want to bring in, that you do that, that you have the money to go do that, or
Mhm.
a frontline assistant. But also, like, when we start getting down to like the fifth and sixth and seventh assistants on the depth chart, like, that matters. Like
Yeah.
somebody can come up with a really good idea that changes the course of a season.
Yeah.
And so you're hoping that they have like the bandwidth and the financial bandwidth to go out and get the coaches that they really, really need. So
That's James Ham. I'm Kyle Madsen. We're the Insiders, were sponsored by Jiffy Lube. Joe Brazil behind the glass. You had some, you